Riley Owens, a dedicated seamstress, spent countless afternoons meticulously mending garments at the local alterations shop. Her nimble fingers wove dreams into fabric, each stitch a testament to her tireless spirit. For months, she deposited bits of her modest income into a small savings jar, all leading up to this one special night, a night at the city's prestigious opera house. She had longed for this experience, a tribute to her grandmother, who had often spoken of their shared dream to attend a performance. On the evening of the much-anticipated event, Riley carefully donned a simple dress she had crafted herself. Its design, understated yet elegant, reflected her love of simplicity and her undeniable skill as a seamstress. She clutched her well-worn tote, filled with nervous anticipation, and made her way to the grandeur of the opera house. The entrance hall was a realm of opulence. The soft glow of crystal chandeliers bathed the marble floors in a silky sheen, and the air was perfumed with a delicate blend of expensive colognes. Patrons adorned in designer evening were moved with a practiced elegance, a striking contrast to Riley's unadorned presence. As she approached the entrance, the concierge, a man with a slick demeanor and cold, assessing eyes, scrutinized her attire. He paused, then openly mocked her plain dress and humble tote with a theatrical sigh, questioning aloud if she had lost her way. The crowd, drawn by his biting sarcasm, watched as Riley stood frozen, her excitement turning swiftly to humiliation. Her cheeks burned as whispers swept through the spectators, marking her as an outsider. Those words, sharp, public, and filled with disdain, pierced deeper than any needle she had ever held, leaving her feeling small and unwanted in a place she had longed to be. In the moments following the concierge's harsh, humiliating remarks, Riley stood paralyzed by embarrassment, her heart pounding in sync with the soft echo of elegant shoes on marble. She glanced around, hoping to find a kind face in the sea of strangers, but the reactions around her only intensified her shame. A few people nearby exchanged amused glances, smirking as though they had just witnessed an expected spectacle. Others cast curious looks her way, averting their eyes when her gaze landed on them as if her simple presence might tarnish their sophisticated evening. A group of elegantly dressed older women near the foyer whispered to one another, their eyes shifting from Riley to the concierge and back. The ringleader of the group leaned over, her jeweled hand covering a smug smirk as she nodded toward Riley, making no secret of her disdain. Despite the soft murmurs and glinting derision surrounding her, a small part of Riley's heart hoped for some unseen ally, yet no voice rose to her defense. Feeling exposed and unwelcome, Riley chose to retreat. She turned slowly, willing herself to move with dignity despite the humiliation burning in her chest. As she exited the grand entrance of the opera house, she felt the weight of eyes tracing each step until she was swallowed by the evening shadows beyond the building's luxurious glow. Once outside, the cold night air stung her cheeks, mixing with the heat of unshed tears that threatened to spill. The street was quieter than the buzzing atmosphere within the opera house, offering her a strange solace. She found a nearby bench, its surface rough and hardened by weather, and sat, trying to collect bits of resolve scattered by the evening's cruel turn. Amid the silence, Riley let her mind wander back over the journey that had led her to this point. The alterations shop where she spent countless hours came to her mind first, its narrow aisles wedged with fabrics, the constant hum of sewing machines, and the familiar faces of customers who returned time and again, appreciative of her careful handiwork. She recalled the mornings of rising before dawn, threading her needle with the hope of creating something beautiful from the ordinary, and the afternoons shading into dusk where she'd take brief breaths of satisfaction between her shifts. Each coin she had deposited into her savings for this night replayed in her mind as a small sacrifice she had willingly made, skipping lunches to pocket their modest cost, declining small indulgences others took for granted, and passing on outings with friends who had long stopped inviting her to nights beyond her workbench. Her mind lingered on the vision of her grandmother, whose tales of opera nights filled with resonant arias had lit Riley's young imagination with the possibilities of otherworldly experiences. Riley's quiet celebrations when she completed a challenging alteration, those bright moments of personal triumph, now lingered as whispers fading into the night. This evening was supposed to be a realization of hope strung across years and generations, a dream handed down with love and care. Now, it lay crumbled, reduced to ash by callous words that had exposed the fragility of her aspirations. For several minutes, Riley sat still, allowing the night to breathe around her. The opera house loomed behind her like a silent monument of luxury that denied her entry. Her mind buzzed with conflicting emotions, frustration, anger, sadness. Yet beneath the turmoil, an undeniable stream of resilience ran, pressing subtly against the edges of her despair. As the immediate sting of the incident dulled slightly into a raw ache, Riley acknowledged that this sense of rejection was not foreign. Life had often dealt her the short stick, and it had conditioned her to endure, though this time it felt particularly personal, a vindication of self-worth judged by outward appearances and dismissed with impunity. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly, her chilled fingers brushing against the worn fabric of her tote as she stood. Holding her head a little higher than before, she considered the path home. Walking wouldn't bring her closer to what she sought tonight, but at that moment, placing distance between herself and the opera house felt strangely medicinal. Yet, as she lingered, Riley's attention was suddenly drawn to a conversation filtering from the side of the building. Two staff members, clearly annoyed, were discussing an ongoing issue. "Can't believe they're still locking those old fire exits," one voice muttered, frustration sharp in his tone. "And the chairs stacked against that back exit? Someone's going to get hurt, especially on a night like this," the other replied. Riley blinked, the words solidifying in her mind against the backdrop of injustice she had just tasted. Her humility had been mocked, her presence questioned, yet here, under wraps, lay a potential danger that could affect any of the guests considered worthy of such opulence. Quietly, she moved closer, her instincts pushing through the layers of vulnerability. If tonight wasn't going to unfold as she wished, perhaps she could still contribute to the safety of others, ironically aiding the very patrons who had ignored her plight. Discreetly, Riley retrieved her phone, recording the carelessly stacked chairs and depositing the conversation she had overheard into a detailed digital note. With measured determination, she emailed her concerns to the city's safety office, attaching the recordings and photos for evidence, ensuring her message couldn't be dismissed like she had been. Resolute, she relatched her phone to her tote's inner pocket, feeling a flicker of empowerment reignite within her. While the opera house had turned her away with disdain, she resolved that their negligence wouldn't remain quietly in the dark. In this small way, she could make her presence count, even if the performance was denied her. Returning to her solitary journey home, Riley stepped with a renewed spark. She would not be defined by the shadows others cast. Instead, she carried with her a poignant reminder of strength, and the soft notes of her grandmother's stories that encouraged her ever toward the light. The following morning, as the golden light of a new day seeped through the cracks of her modest apartment, Riley Owens was sitting at her small kitchen table. The events of the previous night hovered in her mind like a stubborn shadow, finding their way into her morning rituals. Nevertheless, Riley was resilient. Despite her lingering disappointment, she focused on preparing to face the day ahead. After all, the clothes needed mending, orders required filling, and life continued in the rhythmic hum of daily routines. After checking her email, she noticed a reply from the city's public safety office, acknowledging the receipt of her report. Riley felt a strange mix of emotions, a sense of validation mingling with a lingering apprehension. Her contribution, albeit small, had the potential to prompt change, though the reality of such a situation seemed monumental. After having breakfast, Riley headed to the small-town square market, a vibrant installment of colors and noise where she regularly bought fabric and sewing essentials. She moved through the morning crowd, the hustle and bustle a comforting familiarity, starkly different from the polished atmosphere of the opera house. Here, smiles were warm, exchanges genuine, and Jade, the fabric vendor, greeted her with the sunniest smile. Her voice bustled with love. "Hey, Riley. I saw a lovely bolt of deep blue that just screamed your name. Interested?" While she leaned in to examine the fabric, Riley's mind wandered the trail of possibilities ignited by her report. She imagined a safer theater, spaces where simplicity didn't read as inferiority, and justice that wasn't a distant dream. As such thoughts danced through her mind, she caught one of today's newspaper's headlines from her peripheral vision at a nearby stall. Her heart skipped. The story detailing anonymous tips about violations at the Opera House was the news of the morning. It carried a narrative challenging norms and stirred a prickly anticipation in the pit of her stomach. The local press's investigation had lent credibility to her encounter. Her steps momentarily faltered, the implications of her actions sank in with the newsprint's stark black letters. Seeking a moment of quiet, she found her corner at the park. It was peaceful here among the trees, where the city's pulse softened into hushed symphonies, far from any concierge's sneers. Children giggled in the distance, their carefree laughter a symbol of innocence unburdened by the judgments Riley had weathered. As she sat there, the news further unraveled in her mind, teasing a future in which voices like hers pierced through layers of prejudice. Once again, as had become regular, her peace got interrupted by the murmuring of people walking by. "Did you hear? They might have to redo the whole safety protocol," one woman exclaimed to her friend, their conversation sparking with the promise of change. To hear her observations reverberating like this, it was validating and humbling. She listened until the sounds faded away, calves brushing through fallen leaves, smiles brightening their exchanges. Feeling recharged by nature's quiet camaraderie, Riley resumed her path to her apartment, navigating through corridors of mingled histories, each corner oscillating between past vulnerabilities and newfound courage. It was a familiar walk but tinged now with an acknowledgement of movement toward a more inclusive world. Amid her reflections, her phone buzzed anew, dragging her thoughts to the present. An unfamiliar number, yet curiosity pushed her to answer. The woman's voice was warm, professional. It introduced herself as a journalist from the city's daily newspaper. "Ms. Owens, I have to thank you for being the whistleblower in such an important safety matter. We're going public with more findings tomorrow, and I wanted to confirm some details," she explained, gratitude laced through her tone. Riley's cheeks flushed red, an uncertainty flickering. Anonymity had shrouded her actions, yet now there was a public microscope pointed her way. Facts shared, the phone call ended, and she was left sitting with reflections pooling deeper than before. The urge to forge an even broader difference filled her thoughts, yet carried a daunting weight, unlike any stitch she had ever sewn. Arriving back at her apartment, the comfortable clutter offered a familiarity. The smell of worn fabric carried threads of comfort steeped in narratives, past and present. Within this cocoon, she unpacked details and motivations. Within these walls, she processed a shifting world where all she had longed for was perfection, parity, and respect. While she settled back into the rhythm of sewing, her thoughts roamed freely once more. Over the faint hum of her sewing machine and the sporadic sound of hammers, likely pointing to renovations in progress, the narrative of the Opera House and the ripple effect it created filled the space. She glanced at the sharp scissors lying across the table's expanse, their metallic shimmer reminiscent of nights gone. They sat next to a framed photograph of her grandmother. Riley often gazed at the picture for strength when resilience dipped beneath her frame. As the day drew on, and the repetitive motions of her craft induced a calming state, her mind alighted on grander dreams, an opera house someday where kindness met every guest, regardless of attire, where the only measure of worth was the richness of spirit. That night, when moonlight crept into her apartment, mapping constellations across the floor, Riley lay in bed unable to shake the threads of thoughts swirling through her mind, weaving them into mental tapestries of change. Her heart beat with something other than yesterday's hurt. It pulsed with the clarity that she was, indeed, a part of something bigger than ridicule. Real transformation was at play, a dance choreographed unknowingly under her quiet influence. News of the Opera House's violations rapidly gained momentum, snowballing into a citywide story captured by headlines, shared extensively on social media, and debated across various online forums. What had begun as a singular incident, quietly ignited by Riley's astute observations of safety lapses, burgeoned into a public discourse about accountability, inclusivity, and the hidden cracks lurking in prestigious facades. Within days, Riley's once isolated action resonated, gaining traction with a diverse coalition of voices. Influential theater critics, renowned for their discerning eye and substantial following, fiercely criticized the overt elitism and negligence exposed at the Opera House. Their social media platforms transformed into stages of activism, decorated with hashtags and statements rallying against the status quo. These platforms, with the power to shape opinions overnight, teemed with outrage directed toward the long-standing, unchecked practices that Riley's report had unveiled. Riley sat at home, scrolling through endless threads of comments. Her inbox brimmed with messages, some from strangers, others from familiar faces within her own community, each echoing the sentiment of solidarity. Encouragement poured in, their words weaving a new kind of warmth around her isolated experience of that night. Messages of support slowly infiltrated her perception of the incident, wrapping around her like a shield against the lingering echoes of disdain she had once faced. In response to the mounting pressure, the Opera House management hastily launched a campaign of damage control, fraught with promises for immediate reform and public reassurances. They issued a formal statement explaining their deep regret over the mishandled situation and pledged full cooperation with safety and regulatory audits underway. Among the announcements, one detail stood stark against the extensive list: the suspension of the Concierge, whose public derision had catalyzed the string of events now overshadowing their headline act. The Opera House reassured their patrons and the public of new training initiatives, intending to instill a culture of inclusivity and respect in future interactions. Statements flowed with corporate polish, yet for many, Riley's confrontation with the fragile veneer of glamour embodied broader issues that words alone could not mend. Authorities pressed further into their investigation. They found systemic issues not only with the outdated emergency plans but hazardous conditions that underscored a neglectful approach toward public safety. This warranted heavy fines, temporary closures, and a determined revamping of safety standards, pressuring the Opera House to address long-disregarded vulnerabilities. Amidst the procedural activity, Riley found herself inadvertently at the forefront of a moment much larger than her own experience. As others stepped forward to share similar stories of being undervalued due to appearances, Riley's courage became a catalyst for change. Such stories painted a tapestry of mutual understanding, anchoring Riley's actions as part of a collective movement. During these tidal waves of societal change, Riley felt her life ripple alongside them. Her modest apartment, where she had sat alone the night after the ordeal, became a sanctuary of sorts, as friend after friend came to visit. Neighbors arrived armed with appreciation, carrying stories of their own tribulations tinged with admiration for Riley's courage. Beyond her immediate circle, the media continued to pick up her story, bringing newfound opportunities her way. Local organizations reached out, inviting her to speak about the experience and champion the sense of dignity every person was inherently owed. Though public speaking was far from her forte, Riley considered these invitations thoughtfully. The desire to remain unobtrusive existed, yet so did the faint call of potential impact. Other seamstresses, small business owners, and everyday citizens echoed her sentiments, emphasizing the need for inclusivity and empathy within community spaces, irrespective of status or attire. Riley's humble world of threads and needles had interwoven with the vibrant tapestry of societal dynamics, casting her not merely as a subject of misfortune, but as emblematic of resilience and the rich authenticity found even amid simplicity. Through all this, Riley's name had emerged as a rallying point, not for glamour, but for substantive change. From community meetings to online groups distributing calls for action, many drew inspiration from her ability to speak despite the odds stacked heavily against her. One Saturday afternoon, as sunlight bathed the streets in a warm glow, Riley decided to visit a local community center which had organized a discussion inspired by her experience. The center's hall was crowded, filled with people representing all walks of life. Each face turned toward her as she entered, an unspoken appreciation binding them momentarily in understanding. Throughout the event, Riley listened more than she spoke, absorbing stories laced with echoes of past societal judgments. As she took the microphone toward the end, her voice was steady, tempered by a newfound purpose. Her words, initially reticent, grew earnest as she recounted her night at the opera and her decision not to remain silent in the face of injustice. She spoke of courage's duality, a deeply personal journey that unexpectedly became a collective call to action. The applaud thereafter was not for her alone, but for the shared human determination to push boundaries, to make spaces welcoming, and to honor the quiet power of truth. By the meeting's end, hearts and stories mingled freely, woven together by expressions of resilience and the transformative potential within everyone. As Riley prepared to leave, her hand was enveloped in warm handshakes and clasped by those eager to thank her for the change she spurred. Once back in the cool embrace of evening, Riley wandered to her workbench, ready to steady herself amongst familiar patterns and textures. Her fingertips found comfort in the familiarity of fabric. She was a seamstress who knew not just how to stitch materials together, but communities too. Each touch was less about crafting garments and more about cherishing the threads of shared stories now intricately braided around her experience. In courageously facing the tides of her emotion and standing firm for justice, Riley had helped nudge the world toward gentler shores, a testament to an ordinary woman's extraordinary impact, her journey stitched with both quiet resolve and spirited resistance, evident in every ripple of positive change her actions kindled. A few weeks later, as the crisp autumn air carried leaves across the city streets, Riley Owens found herself returning to a comfortable rhythm. Each morning, she rose early before the dawn light crept fully into her small apartment, ready to resume her diligent work as a seamstress. This sanctuary of fabric and thread, once an emblem of her humble existence, was now the cornerstone of a life enriched by the experiences that had unfolded. In the days following the Opera House upheaval, Riley noticed a change in the way she carried herself. The insecurities she had once harbored about her worth and belonging appeared to recede, replaced by an inner confidence that broadened her perspective. Her heart swelled with a quiet pride, not for notoriety, but for having instigated a meaningful dialogue, for being more than the sum of her dress, tote, and humble origins. One morning, Riley received an unexpected letter. It was from the city's Cultural Affairs Department, expressing their deep gratitude for her actions that catalyzed change not only in procedural but societal dimensions. Her observations had drawn attention to necessary reforms far beyond what anyone initially envisioned. Touched by the recognition in their words, Riley felt a warmth bloom in her chest. The validation she received was subtly affirming and deeply humbling. In addition, vibrant discussions sparked by her narrative had cast her as somewhat of an inspirational figure, prompting further invitations to speak at small local theaters and community events. Although this newfound attention was sometimes daunting, it drove Riley not merely to continue voicing her values but to reinforce the connection between people and stories, which often lay unheard and uncelebrated. Amid renewed societal focus on respectfulness and inclusivity within city services and establishments, offers arrived from the Opera House itself. Among them was a formal apology, extended with an invitation to return as their guest. Riley appreciated the gesture but chose not to revisit the scene of raw vulnerability. Instead, she directed this offer as a charitable act, ensuring it benefited those who might never envision themselves worthy to attend. Riley's energy shifted to fostering relationships created by the ripples of her actions. She regularly visited community centers, sharing time and talents. Her dedication reshaped her modest seamstress space to become a collaborative hub, where others like her gathered to share skills, stories, and encouragement, threads interwoven with resilience. Passing the Opera House on her way home one afternoon, Riley noted several changes since her last encounter. New signage declared rigorous implementation of innovative safety measures, coupled with statements detailing the creation of inclusivity policies to welcome patrons irrespective of appearances. It was a poignant reminder of the agency embedded in simplicity when paired with candor and resolve. Back at her workshop, the dances of rosy sunset shadows cast across bolts of fabric that lay waiting for her touch. Riley tied on her apron with a flick of practiced ease. As her sewing machine hummed its familiar song, each gentle thrum stitched together not only garments but whispered narratives of hope shepherded by countless acts of courage. Her workspace overflowed with colorful materials, deep blues and vivid reds reminiscent of adventures thoughtful and untraveled. Swathes of rich cloth spoke to plans in motion, each texture and print yielding to her dreams, telling tales of untapped potential. Riley's hands worked confidently, any hesitance replaced long ago by the trust she had nurtured stitch by stitch. In the soft murmurs of evening, her phone buzzed gently at a table corner. This time, it was a message from a fellow seamstress, acknowledging Riley for having inspired her to speak more freely in her own sphere, thus binding over countless threads of support. Kind exchanges such as these reinforced the truth Riley had come to cherish. Small actions in everyday life can resonate with grand significance and inspire shifts in both individual and collective consciousness. Eventually, she plucked a steaming cup of tea from the kitchen, a soothing emblem of comfort, and curled up in her favorite chair by the window. As she sipped slowly, the contents of her mind danced comfortably in a space of stillness she had carved for herself, a moment cherished for its mundane grace. Riley's thoughts often drifted to poignant conclusions during these quiet evening moments. The journey she traversed was defined not by grand gestures but by quiet resilience, ordinary choices leading to extraordinary changes. The impact that seemed insurmountable wound itself into daily life, evident in laughter intermingled with silences, in embracers and humble storytellers alike, rejoicing anew in shared experiences stretched across rooftops on the crest of autumn winds. Her gaze flicked towards the streets, shadows deepening, playful against the lamplight's golden hue. Riley reveled in a rare satisfaction, the knowledge that she, in her simplicity and resolve, had enacted real, meaningful change. She was a seamstress who wove broad, colorful threads beyond fabric. Riley Owens, who unknowingly continued a legacy of courage, had found validation beyond social constructs, shifting perspectives, subtly altering the dialogue of shared humanity. Lulled by that comforting assurance, her fingers danced one last time through a stream of fabric, sketching into being possibilities and dreams anew. On this night and those stretching ahead, Riley's story, the simple woman with extraordinary courage, was sustained by layers unseen, marking the world with quiet strength and kindness woven firmly into its seams. And it was enough.